Our next session is going to look at a UK digital ID, how we can ensure a balance of power between the citizen and the state. Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently announced plans to roll out a new digital ID scheme across the UK, with plans to make this mandatory for right-to-work checks by the end of this Parliament. Proposals for ID cards are not new in the UK context. They've long been touted as a solution to solve contentious issues of the day, most recently illegal immigration. It is less clear what a digital ID would mean. Little detail has been provided about this idea, although the Tony Blair Institute's writings on the subject may offer some clues. Rather than simply debate digital ID, this panel explores the design principles and safeguards needed to keep a suitable balance of power between the citizen and the state, and considers key issues from other countries where digital IDs have been designed and deployed. Chairing this discussion, we have Wendy Grossman, and she will be joined on the panel by Professor Mirca Madianou, author and professor, Department of Media, Communications and Cultural Studies at Goldsmiths, the University of London. Karla Prudencio, Program Director and Advocacy Officer at Privacy International. And David Birch, author, advisor, and commentator on digital financial services. Thank you very much.
Welcome, or I guess you've already been here. What I'm hoping will come out of this panel is really not for or against. I don't think it's a very interesting question, particularly since we have absolutely no detail about what the government's proposals may or may not look like. But I would like to think about what would good look like and what would bad look like. And so I'm going to ask, in a minute, I'm going to ask everybody to talk about that a little bit. We do know, the one thing we do know is that the Office of Budget Responsibility has estimated the cost of whatever digital ID we eventually get at £1.8 billion. And I have a note here that the House of Commons Parliamentary Secretary of the Cabinet Office is standing up a team for free digital credentials for all. There's supposed to be a consultation in early 2026. On the other hand, what we've also seen is something about a mandatory digital ID that you have to use to prove your right to work. Who knows? I can only tell you that in the history of ID cards, since the end of World War II, the last ID card was scrapped in about 1950. And ever since, every 3 to 5 years, there's been a new proposal for some kind of ID card. And the last one of those was actually passed into legislation in the wake of 9/11. And in 2005, the National Identity Cards Bill was passed. And it was repealed again after the Conservatives took over in 2010, 2011. The thing about these ID cards is every time they're proposed, the reason given for them is whatever the obsession is, hot topic is of the day. So if you go through the history, which I actually did in about 2005, it's really interesting because there's one set of proposals that were supposed to ensure that there weren't future disasters like Hillsborough, and it would end football hooliganism. Crime is a common one, immigration is a common one, benefits, access to benefits, eliminating benefit fraud is another common one. And this time, we've heard about right to work and we've heard about immigration. Who knows? But I always remember Peter Lilly saying that when he was in Margaret Thatcher's government, every time there was a new IT minister, he would show up with a proposal for ID cards. And he concluded that there was some Humphrey Appleby somewhere who had this thing in his bottom drawer and kept hauling it out and foisting it on each new minister as he showed up. But this is 2025, not 2005. Technology has changed a lot. And even in 2005, it was foreseeable that it would not matter if there was a card, because there would be a big database and there would be online access, and a policeman who wanted to establish your identity would simply ask you for a fingerprint, or you could see that coming even then. So I'm going to ask Dave Birch here, who's an author, advisor, and commentary on digital financial services, is what I've got written down. Dave does a lot of thinking about digital identity and digital money. And so I'm going to ask him to explain a little bit. He keeps saying that Britain really needs a digital infrastructure. So I want him to tell us what he means by that and what it is that we actually need. And then we're going to have some more discussion of what other things need to be thought about. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, David?
So I think the idea of trying to organize a modern society and deliver the benefits of it to everybody without some form of digital identity infrastructure is ridiculous. We have to have some kind of infrastructure in place, whether it's to improve the delivery of public services, which I'm sure it would do, whether it's to help us to cut down on fraud, which is the #1 crime in the UK at the moment, which I'm sure it would do, or whether it would just make everyday life that much easier, because otherwise you live in a world where, for example, the accountant I had to take in a copy of my passport. He's known me for 25 years. I had to take a copy of my passport so he could photocopy it because of some law or whatever about it. And I said, what are you going to do with this? And he said, nothing. So you can put it in a drawer. And this goes a million times, like up and down the country, all day, every day. People messing around, having to try. Or when I did my last right to work thing, where I had to actually send a copy of my passport in an email to some, it's already being used in North Korea now, I'm sure. So the thing is, so people say, oh no, we're proud, independent, sovereign people. We don't need identity and whatever. This is absolutely ridiculous. We live in a society. Now, but the question is, what kind of infrastructure should that be? And I think one of the fundamental problems we have with it is, apart from like a strange English kind of, we don't want ID cards because they're essentially French, which I mean, really, the deep, no, but it is. This is the deep-seated. The only reason we have passports, it doesn't matter.
Don't get diverted.
No, but I'm just saying that the reason we have passports, this started when a Piedmont anarchist tried to assassinate the Emperor Napoleon III at the Paris Opera. And it happened he lived in London, so there was the Daily Mail scandal, London's full of anarchists, something must be done. But the point is, whether our vision of France or North Korea is what stops us from thinking about this, it's wrong and it's stupid. And it's fundamentally reactionary, because the debate always gets discussed in terms of ID cards. Now, the report from the Tony Blair Institute, not the previous one, but the one that was written with William Hague, talked about the need for a modern digital identity infrastructure, and it was actually a very good piece of work. It was reported in the yellow press as war criminal calls for Nazi ID cards, but that's actually not what it said. What it said was, we need a digital identity infrastructure. And I'll finish by just saying what the key factor there is. The key factor there is, an infrastructure is not about who you are and papers, please. An infrastructure is about, are you entitled to do what it is that you want to do? Are you a doctor? Are you allowed through this door? Are you a member of this club? Are you a holder of a valid ticket? It's not about who you are. We use who you are all the time because as a proxy to get the information that we actually need, because we don't actually have that information. So we keep asking people who they are so we can look them up in a database to find out whether I was allowed to come to the conference today. What we want is a system where we move directly to, can I do what it is I want to do?
So you want to cut out a bunch of middlemen.
I think we should move to a credentials-based infrastructure, but that's the technological thing. But my point is, we need some sort of, I can't understand anybody who thinks that we don't need some kind of infrastructure. This is crazy. Similarly, I can't understand anybody who thinks we need a card, least of all the Prime Minister. And where this came from, I have no idea. It's like the Cohen's hotline. It was just dreamed up at the party conference to, something must be done. This is something, therefore it must be done. It makes absolutely no sense on any level.
I thought the real.
I don't want to make a political point.
But I thought the real clue was when he started talking about digging through the bottom drawer to find a bank statement. Because, good Lord, do you know anybody who looks in the bottom drawer for a bank statement?
Not for their own one, obviously.
Good point. So this is Karla Prudencio, who is a program director at Privacy International. I think that's our second PR person for the day. And I think what we thought you would talk about is the safeguards and strategies, particularly if you can relate to what Dave said.
Yeah, totally.
Helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think I fundamentally agree with what Dave was saying in the sense of we need to have a proof, or we need to have an infrastructure in place in order to identify you. This is something that, as Wendy was also explaining, is we have a historic reason for doing it. But I also want to go back to the title of this panel, which I think is really interesting because we talk about balanced power between citizens and states. And when we talk about this balance, we are acknowledging that we need some limits, some safeguards, some check-ins, because this power is not naturally balanced. We need to have a specific system in place in order to do it. It's important to recognize that these digital ID systems are not necessarily neutral tools. They fundamentally recognize who holds power over identity, which is someone needs to hold power over this. We know that, but who holds power and how they hold this power, it's important. So many national ID systems raise serious privacy concerns because they are by design large-scale mechanisms through which governments are collecting and processing a lot of data. Features often built with these systems, such as the mandatory biometric collection that we were talking about, also has an amount of interference in privacy and also risk expanding government surveillance powers. As you must know, biometric data is something that you cannot change. It's your face, it's your voice, it's something really particular about you. And when you link that data to something, to a specific activity that you do, you are giving power to a government or whoever holds the power on that specific database to track you over what you do in your life in general. So we often overlook how does this look in the real life? And I want to bring a specific example of something that is happening in Mexico right now. In Mexico passed a bunch of different laws in July this year. And one of those laws is about mandatory biometric ID for all citizens. They will create a unique database, centralized database with everyone and every transaction or access to public or private services. That's the law. They don't say how, they don't say who will regulate this. It's just like a general, very big power. Also says that telecom providers need to link that ID to a specific telephone number. And if they fail to do it, your line will be cut. And all these big database will have connection with central intelligence power. And this central intelligence power will give access to every authority, including the military, to track in real time everyone they want across all their moves. As I was saying, private or public moves, schools, banks, transactions, tax authorities, they don't need to suspect in something in particular. They don't need criminal or anything. They don't need judicial authorization. And of course, all this system is secret. So you cannot even see what's happening behind.
So basically your complete nightmare.
It's my complete nightmare. But it shows, of course, you were saying about the narrative behind the system, right? The reasons that why. Here they say now it's illegal work and trying to protect the borders. In Mexico, they say it's fighting organized crime and even disappearance. Both are real legitimate concerns. In Mexico, it's a problem. It's a legitimate concern. However, the solution, it seems disproportionate at least, right? So we are seeing these systems, and even if they have different particularities, you need to ask yourself the architecture behind the systems, the logic of solving very complex social issues with the digital wound, and also the problem of function creep that we know, which is you start with one purpose, but you are building a system, an infrastructure that once is there is really difficult to contain. Power change, mandate change, data flows can change as well. But once that you have that system, you need to ask yourself if the purpose for what it started will be at some point change. And we have seen history of this happening in other countries.
That's what worries me when Dave starts talking about presenting something that shows you're entitled to do something, is the specter of the permission-based society. Ira Levin wrote a book in about 1970 called This Perfect Day, in which anytime you wanted to go anywhere or do anything, you had to hold your bracelet up to a scanner and it would say yes or no. And that's the image in my head when you say that. But
I did that with my phone getting on the bus to come here.
no, this is Mirca Madianou, who is a professor at Goldsmiths. And she's just had, I think it's come off this week, unfortunately, but there was an exhibit at Goldsmiths of writings and drawings by people in these refugee camps along the border of Thailand. And some of it was about what identity meant to them. So I'm hoping you'll tell us a bit about that field work as well as.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm coming to this from a slightly, or rather quite different angle, but some issues, of course, are overlapping. So my work for the last 12, 13 years has been in humanitarian contexts. I'm looking at the uses of digital technologies and computational practices in humanitarian emergencies and humanitarian operations. And in the last 2 years specifically, I've been looking at digital ID systems which are used in refugee camps. They've long been piloted in refugee camps. And so I'll speak about this research that I've been conducting with colleagues in a refugee camp at the border between Thailand and Myanmar, where digital ID systems have been in use since 2015. And I don't know if you're aware, but in refugee camps, biometric technologies have uses that extend well beyond registration purposes. So in order for a refugee to access rations or cash assistance, they may have to use facial recognition. They may have to use facial recognition. In the camp where I work, that's exactly what happens. In order to collect charcoal to cook the rice that they have also collected via facial recognition, they will have to scan their iris in order to see a doctor or a nurse, and that includes children, not just adults. So there is this kind of trivialization of biometrics where the encounter with a biometric reader happens several times a day, possibly. And so what our project has been looking at is what are the consequences of these practices for people in the camps? What do they think about the systems? Do the systems work? When there are errors, what are the consequences? And also because we know our interlocutors are stateless and therefore need some kind of legal ID, because without one you cannot work, you cannot get out of the camp, you cannot open a bank account, you have very limited rights. We also used participatory art, and it is through those participatory sessions that the artwork was produced that you saw at Goldsmiths. And yeah, unfortunately, I'm really sorry I can't show you this artwork because I think it's much more eloquent than anything I can say today. But it's through this artwork that our research co-producers, the refugees we worked with, were able to express their concerns about the biometric systems, but also imagine alternative futures. So one key finding, as it were, that comes, or one theme that comes through this artwork is that our interlocutors basically tell us that they have to constantly authenticate themselves for all these things I mentioned earlier, but they don't have any form of legal recognition. So the current digital ID systems enable identification without recognition. There is that key paradox, right, in the process. And even when there is authentication or identification, it doesn't work perfectly because the machine produces a lot of errors. And these errors are really devastating in the context of the camp where you have no other alternatives, right? So if you cannot be authenticated to collect your rations or your cash assistance, what are the alternatives? Some people help out each other. But the whole point is that this is inconvenience, but it can also be very significant when there are no other means for survival for the most vulnerable groups. But even when these errors are produced, I just want to flag this as well. There are many other things that are produced because a lot of biometric technologies are trained on what we call prototypical whiteness, right? They're trained on typically Caucasian faces, very often male faces, and there is a high margin of error when measuring other bodies, whether that's in terms of gender or race or disability or age or class. And so what we find is that a lot of our participants really struggle to get their faces authenticated. And what I found very troubling is that a lot of my interlocutors told me, my face is not valid Of course, their face is absolutely valid. The problem is the machine, right? It's the algorithm that has been trained on data that don't reflect their realities. But you can see here how vulnerable, how people who might be marginalized are further marginalized by the machine, right? These machine errors produce race and produce sort of this internalize or make people internalize inferiority. And this shapes people's perceptions of themselves and others. And that's what concerns me when we talk about biometrics in UK context or in the European context, because we have to design systems that would be there and would work for people who might be marginalized. You don't design a system for those who are already privileged, but for those who might be excluded. And that has to be a principle. If I have a minute, just to say a few things that came up from our participatory art sessions and of course also our wider research. I think that the artwork really conveys loud and clear the values that should underpin such systems, right? What people tell us is they want equality, they want dignity, they want recognition, they want justice, right? These are the themes that come across in the drawings. And they also want a system that respects the plurality of their identities, which don't often fit in the kind of binary categories of the biometric reader. So I think that's really important. And if I can finish with just one example, because I don't think it's just a technological matter. We can design the most sophisticated digital infrastructure that has all the safeguards, that has sunset clauses, that is co-produced with communities, which is the other important thing, right? Whatever we do, we have to invite communities and people to be part of the design process. But even if we do all those things, if the reasons that motivate these systems are concern about immigration, or we employ these systems in a hostile environment, these systems are going to produce very difficult outcomes for marginalized groups. So one of my participants, one of my research co-producers, designed a picture, a drawing that he named football. So I asked him, why is this called football? It's about digital ID. And he says, I want an ID that will allow me to get out of the camp so I can go to the nearby village and play football without getting arrested. Because he doesn't have any form of digital ID or any form of ID. He cannot get out of the camp. And if he ever does, he will get arrested. For me, this is very poignant. First, because it shows that this distance between his imagination, imagining his ideal system, and reality is not very distant. But it's also, I think, what he asks is so modest and so ordinary. But I think we have to also remember here that when he's asking not to be arrested, he's not really asking for the perfect ID system. He's asking for the hostile environment not to be there. So it's really a call for social justice. And I think we have to remember, when we talk about these digital ID systems or digital infrastructure more broadly, we really have to think about the wider social context and questions of social justice within which these systems will be implemented. And if the systems, if the context continues to be hostile, then there will never be really a fair and just identity system. So I'll stop here.
So I've derived 4 principles so far. One is that ID is football. Don't design a hostile system. Support plural identities. And the one that really interests me most is design for outliers, because one of my friends is a pioneer in biometrics, and his name is Jim Wayman, and one of the things he says often is, whatever, people never have what you think they're going to have, where you think they're going to have it. And he learned this the first day he deployed a system. It was collecting thumbprints. And in the first hour, a guy shows up with 2 right thumbs. This was never imagined in designing the system, and it just fell out right away. So Dave, you're the technologist here. How do you design for outliers? You've said yourself that you really need to design for the edge cases. So how can they do this?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think it's the edge cases that define the digital identity system. So if someone was to say to me, the Prime Minister, for example, this is how the digital identity system is going to work, my first question wouldn't be, how is it going to work for me? It would be for the edge cases. And canonically, I think this is a grown-up audience, so we can say I tend to think of 3 edge cases to test the system. I call them the 3 Ws. So it's witness protection, it's whistleblowing, and it's access to adult services. So if you tell me this is how the identity system is going to work, I want to know, how does it work in those cases? So you tell me you're going to build a big database of people with biometric face recognition or whatever. Think about how that like work about. So I'm James Bond, right? And I'm going to pretend to be Dave Birch because I want to be at the heart of everything that's going on. So in the old days, it was easy at MI5. You just go to a drawer and get a spare New Zealand passport which says Dave Birch, and off you go, no problem. Now, you've got to have a fake LinkedIn, fake Twitter, and then you walk to because the face recognition, the casino's got an Amazon Ring doorbell. So you go down there, and the first thing it says is, hello, James. So this is my starting point. If you're going to have this, how is it going to work for witness protection? What happens when someone has to change from one identity to another identity? Not because they're a criminal, but because we want them to, because we want to look after them and protect them. How do you give a woman escaping a violent, how do you ensure that her temporary identity that she's given to help her works in all circumstances? If you're just going to have a big database of everybody's faces in it, you might as well be Facebook. That gets us absolutely nowhere. So you're absolutely right to point to the edge cases. Now, what I would say, and you expect me to say this because I'm obviously come from a more technological side, I would say that the rather strange 1950s vision of a brick card, which seems to be based on Estonia actually more than anything else, doesn't it? So I assume one of the Prime Minister's advisors came back drunk from a stag do in Estonia shortly before the party conference. I need something for the last day. I know. And I'm not even sure if I'm joking about that, actually. But I would say, look, we have technologies we didn't have 20 or 30 years ago. We have zero knowledge proofs. We have secure multi-party computation, fully homomorphic encryption.
And we have a digital trust framework.
And we have a framework to put them in. So the idea that you can give me not an ID that says I'm entitled to get this rice, but a credential that says I'm allowed to get this rice. And the biometrics are not for identifying me, they're for authenticating me against that credential, where there would always be a backup as well. I think this is actually a very promising way of thinking. I think this makes for a very, and the thing is, if you don't have a big database in the middle with what rice everybody's allowed to have, then there's nothing for the hackers to get into, which really is quite a serious problem at the moment. Look at Jaguar Land Rover. The hack of that was so serious that it showed up in the British GDP figures because it was, and you know how all this stuff, this isn't because some North Korean has got a quantum computer that can break Jaguar Land Rover's encryption. It's because somebody rang up the help desk, oh, I've forgotten my password. I'm the CEO, can I get a password?
And it's believable.
And in all of this kind of infrastructure that's based on this kind of modern technology is a fundamental bulwark against all that. So I absolutely agree with you about the edge cases. All I would say is I think I'm much more optimistic that we can do something about those edge cases than a few years ago.
But if I understand what Mirca has said, the people in those camps actually do have credentials. They have credentials that will let them get rice. What they don't have is anything that will let them leave the camp and return safely.
Yeah, they don't have the fundamental thing, which is a passport or a legal ID, but they have these,
authentication.
Yeah, they can authenticate themselves many times. And the question is, do you actually need to give your foundational biometric data to get a kilo of rice? Is that?
I would say you shouldn't have to.
But yeah.
But again, it's this different, it's about proving who you are. Because in my head, because I'm living in Woking, not in a refugee camp in Myanmar, is if I want to go and play football, what I want to see is this person allowed to go and play football. I don't care about who they are or where they come from or anything like that. I want to see the credential for the specific use case.
But you see, that's where the permission-based society comes. We've already got bits of it. For example, air travel now. The reason they collect all that data 24 hours before you fly to the States is that the States wants to look at the data and decide whether to let you board the plane. We have lost the right to travel in that way over time. And it's been very slow, and people haven't really, Edward Hasbrook sees it that way, but most people don't. And so what I worry about is all of a sudden, in order to play football, you have to have some sort of mission.
We should go back to the way it was before World War I, where there were no passports and anybody could just walk across borders. I mean, look what happened, World War I.
I don't know if you've noticed, we've got quite a few wars going on at the moment. And Trump seems bound, like he wants to start one in, of all places, Venezuela.
I'm just saying, if we don't want these honeypots of data and...
No, I agree with that.
I think it's entirely, to use the absolutely simplest example, there is a world of difference between the pub asking you, who are you? Can I see a driving license?
And are you old enough to drink?
And are you over 18? Are you? And not even what is your date of birth, because even that's personal information. So being able to demonstrate a credential, yes, I'm over 18. This is what we should be aiming for with this infrastructure.
Karla, I've added a fifth principle, which is don't create hacker targets. Do you have some more don'ts to contribute to this list?
More than don'ts, I would say I have some questions that we need to ask.
Questions are good.
I would say that first, and we were talking about this, but it's like we need to challenge also the need for these systems for any specific purpose. We already established that we need to identify ourselves, that we need to access this for accessing of rights, but solving some complex issues around or with this as the promise of this will solve migration, this will solve
terrorism,
this will solve terrorism, I think that's a real problem. So we need to start like challenging the needs and see if this problem can actually be solved by ID or we need like something else, or if we have a less intrusive alternative to use. I also think that, of course, and we know that, but no legal ID, so no ID system should move forward without a concrete legal and regulatory framework of data protection, surveillance laws, specific oversight powers of what's happening there. Also, of course, this is not, the safeguard shouldn't be only laws, but like human process, human rights assessment, accessibility and equality assessment, independent technical audits, redress mechanisms, purpose limitation checks. As you were talking a little bit about that, Mirca, but we must protect the complexity of identity. Identity change and the lifetime across contexts and communities. And we need to be able to protect that. For example, like with transgender people also have some problems with ID, and we need to be able to solve those issues in order to have a fair system. And I also think we need to start like scrutinizing companies behind the systems and not just the procurement laws around this, but also the design and influence that they have, the dependencies that states will create with these companies, vendor lock-in and commercial incentives that they have, who benefits around these systems and at whose expense. So I think private-public partnerships are something that we need to scrutinize really well when we create this.
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because the UK government does not have a good record of building IT systems with success. Yes, go ahead.
Can we come into that?
Yes.
Because I think this is really important, and I don't think it's often acknowledged enough that once you introduce a digital IT system, it is almost always privately run. It is always, even if, I mean, there are variations here because, you know, who owns the data, and these are complex issues, but most typically there will be a commercial company behind the infrastructure. And this, I think, really fundamentally changes the relationship between citizens and the state, because in the past you would have citizens and the state, but now actually you have a third party or group of companies, which are those that run these digital infrastructures. And this is really what I call infrastructuring, right? And I think this is much more about a form of ID that is delivered digitally. It's a complete transformation of the relationship between citizens and the state. And it's often invisible because it happens in the infrastructural background. It's not often registered to citizens, for example, that their data might be going through systems or pipelines that are privately owned. We don't exactly know who has access to them. And this, coupled with the question of mission creep or function creep that you mentioned, Karla, it raises a lot of concerns about what can happen to people's data, where they might end up, who might end up using them, for what purpose. And I think we need to be aware of that. And I think given we're talking about the relationship between citizen and the state, we need to think also what role does the market play in this process, and the great opportunities that are there for companies to have all these lucrative contracts. So who benefits is an important question, but also how fundamentally all this changes the relationship between citizens and the state. And yeah, I have other things to say, but
I really the characterization of it as a three-way relationship. I think that's really important. I heard spluttering.
No, I wasn't spluttering. I was agreeing. I was just saying, I think obviously we're stupid to hand over everything to some giant foreign corporation that would take a course. We live in a mixed economy. We do want companies to produce goods and services more efficiently and more productively, using data appropriately. I think some way in which you can take these credentials and use them for useful purposes, I think will be a good thing. One of the things that bothers me about GDPR is this thing about locking data down so that it gets hoarded by, so only certain people can take advantage of it because they've got these hordes of data. We want the data to flow, but we want it to flow in a privacy preserving way, which is why I'm very focused on credentials. And also, there are some basic things we can do, of course, because we can say, I'm sorry, you have to use these particular open standards, or we can do a lot just going down that road.
Age verification is not providing a very good example, I have to say.
That's a very interesting case in point, isn't it? Because we already have probably, actually, I don't know the numbers. What is it in the UK? 10 million people already have done the age verification for Pornhub and such, because it shows.
But it
they
isn't
were
just
probably all signing
Pornhub.
that petition
If
against
I-
the ID card at the same time.
If possibly. But if I want to get a direct message on Blue Sky, because I have not age verified, I have to use a VPN and log in from another country, and then I can see the direct message. But if I log in from the UK, I can't see it. Now, Blue Sky, okay, it's a young system, but my X account dates to 2007. It ought to be obvious to X that I'm over 18. Do the math,
I
right?
mean, it did, because I used all of the different age verification methods, because I'm not a terribly interesting person, and I wanted to see how they all worked. The one that I thought was most surprising was one, I can't remember who it was, but it might have been Pornhub or one of the other ones, I can't remember. But you could sign up just by using your email address. It took your email address and put it into some sort of algorithm to see if that email address had been used more than.
Actually, that sounds fairly intelligent.
Yeah, but how would they know whether it was used by me or not? It was just,
Well,
it's an old email. I have loads of old email addresses. So anyway, there's a sidetrack. My point is, we can do very positive things with open standards and so on.
okay,
So-
how many in the audience have things they want to say?
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh God, all of them. Really.
Yeah, okay, folks, I think, shall we? Yeah, so can we have the two, do we have two microphone people? Yeah, okay. Each take a half and pick somebody. I'm going to try to get as many in as I can. We'll take them at least in pairs.
Small part of correction. Wartime ID numbers. They finally got phased out in July 1995 because they became the NHS number, and July 1995 was the last time that a birth certificate was referenced using the wartime ID number. One of the interesting things, we then got this 10-digit NHS number that nobody can remember. One of the issues is, why is it we have so many different IDs? And it's because the government departments won't trust each other's reference numbers. And if they won't trust each other's reference numbers, why on earth should we be expected to trust any identity that they issue, bearing in mind they will always claim crown immunity if anything goes wrong with it?
Oh, great.
They are. I'm sorry.
Next one.
Hi, Rowan Wilkinson, I'm from Chatham House. I wanted to push back.
Do you have to obey the rule at all
No,
times?
you're all right. I just wanted to push back slightly on your comment that governments don't build good tech services. I think they do, and I think broadly around the world we've seen many examples of that. And even in the UK we have with gov.uk, which is one of the most trusted government websites. Given that the UK wallet might actually be situated within that architecture, within gov.uk, I wanted the panel to reflect slightly on the role of public trust and maintaining confidence in the digital ID debate, given that there is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about what it actually means.
So the idea of using the gov.uk one login for public services, I think, is in principle not a bad idea. I used it for my company's house. Or was it Pornhub? I can't remember. One of them, I don't remember. And it worked fine. Using that for private sector applications, I'm rather against that. I think having one login for government is a big enough problem that needs solving, especially because the system they put in, didn't they outsource it to Romania or somewhere, and it all got hacked? And obviously you don't want a situation where baffled pensioners give out their ID, and then all of a sudden the hackers have got access to everything instead of just their bank accounts. So I think we have to be careful with it, but I think in principle, having a public sector single sign-on, I think is not a bad idea. Extending that across the private sector, I don't think that's a good idea.
Let's have two more comments or questions or whatever people want to say.
Yeah, hi, Georgia Osborne, Ofcom. I just have a point of clarification, but also to invite the panel to talk more about it, is the difference between identity verification and attribute verification. So in terms of, let's say your attribute is age, you can verify that age without them knowing who you are. And also the idea of your ID verification showing that you are who you say you are is very different from just verifying that attribute specifically, or a set of attributes is verifiable. So I just wanted to invite the panel as well on that one.
And one more.
Yeah, just some comment on digital ID. Actually, if you look at the other country, for example, Hong Kong, as far as I could remember, they have been used digital ID for more than 5 decades, older than me, because it was under the colonial government. They already issued this identity card. So of course they changed to the digital one. So there's a lot of experience we can learn from other jurisdictions about how to implement the digital ID around the world. So I do not think this is a particular unique problem for UK. And so this is my first comment. The second one, actually, I think when we talk about digital ID, we need to understand what is the purpose. Is this really for credential, which means you can verify all of your different roles, or just for some fundamental purpose? For example, like we use digital ID in Hong Kong, just for verification of our identity, for example, for the legal reason, for financial reason, that's all. We don't say this has to be used to verify whether you are the member of a club. So we need to have, I think, in terms of data privacy protection, because we have this principle about minimal collection and for the purpose and the proportionality. So this should be applied to the digital ID as well. Thank you.
Do either of you want to say anything to any of those?
Yeah, great questions. I think the question of trust that you asked is so important. And I would say that one thing that's fundamental to having any kind of healthy relationship with the government is to have a system of accountability to citizens, pathway to redress when errors are made. And this is really important if digital ID systems are used to access services, which is really, I think, what a lot of the concerns around digital ID systems are about. So I think that would be, for me, an important aspect, that the system would have to have a accountability to citizens, involvement of citizens in design and everything, but then also really important is a pathway to redress when errors are made, which is often not the case. And that's where a lot of problems, because it's really hard for citizens then to find a way to correct, because the onus is on them to correct any errors. And I think that needs to be very clear.
I would say that I'm extremely familiar with in fact, as far as I recall, Hong Kong's was the first ID card that actually had a chip on it in the world. So I'm not arguing with the technological prowess behind it. I just don't think the Hong Kong system is culturally appropriate to the UK. I think we need something slightly different.
No, I was going to reflect on your comment. I think you're absolutely right. And sometimes we use ID as form of identification, and we confuse it with authentication that can build upon biometrics or something else. I would say that's right. And also sometimes these systems are intertwined. And so you have an ID system that also has a form of authentication in it with biometric collection. So I think we need to be careful, and we do that distinction, but at the same time, because we don't know what the system is going to look like, we need to be careful of both perspectives.
Can I just make one more point about, you're using age as the example, but I think what you're saying is actually true across the board. The general case is not about identification. The general case is about attributes. And we're using age as but if you want another example to think about, you probably saw the story earlier in the year about Naomi Campbell, who got banned from running charities for 5 years, I think, because she ran into some trouble. I don't know if you remember, but the essence of that story was she hired a woman who she thought was a lawyer, but wasn't a lawyer. And it's that sort of thing, which is, how would you check whether someone's a lawyer or not? I suppose you can go online and look something up online and
You have your bar.
go around
Well,
and,
in
is
the
there a lawyer?
States, yeah, you call the bar
Yeah,
association.
you can phone up the bar association. This person claims to be Dave Birch. And how do you know it's Dave Birch?
Ask them,
What does he look like? They don't have a record of what you look like.
no, but they have their number.
You have a number. I can give you a number.
Yeah.
I think moving into a sort of modern world of cryptographically
just tend to
protected
think-
credentials like that is generally a good thing.
I just tend to think that any credential that is worth hacking will be hacked.
I think I'm more optimistic than you about the technological infrastructure. I think if you don't have things to be hacked, then
Two more questions or comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I don't know if the mic's on, little bit confused, UK digital identity, and we're talking about a lot of other identities. Also the framing balance of power. This is not an adversarial relationship. The government is the most significant provider of services we have, right? We rely upon them for services. So framing it as a balance of power seems wrong for me. And to note that this is a Dutch biometric ID, and government gov.uk equivalent is called DigiID in the Netherlands, and I use it when I need to use it. It's used across Europe. This is not something that is unique. It exists. It answers almost all of the problems you've discussed today, pretty much. Not all of them, but almost all. And you're absolutely right, Dave. We should be talking about digital ID infrastructure because that's what it is. This I mostly use when I go and pick up a packet at my post office, and they don't do any scanning. They look at my picture and my ID and they recognize it as a legitimate thing and they give me a package. It's rare, no, but it's rarely scanned. When it is scanned, it happens through passport control. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. You just have to ensure that you have protections in place, that information does not bleed across departments unless you ask it to bleed, because it's your information. And if I want to share medical information across hospitals, then I can do that. It will not go anywhere else without my permissions, because just the same as we have Privacy International working in the UK, there are very strong privacy and other data protection agencies who've been involved in designing these systems. Designed the system, it worked perfectly well. And yes, you will see edge case complaints, but by and large, it works really quite well. And I think we're approaching it in the wrong way, is what I'm saying.
I think the reason people see it as adversarial is most of the time when these things come up, they come up. I think that's because the first presentation of it was to use it to curb immigration and cut things like benefit fraud. So that instinctively sounds a little bit hostile.
But the Dutch are consensual. We're not like them.
Who has the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Yes, hello. Olivier Crepanoble, Internet Society UK chapter, but I'll speak on my own behalf. David spoke earlier about .gov.uk1 services. Isn't that a digital ID? Because they've now asked for biometric data to register. And not only that, but if you have a UK company, let's say, either as a director or a shareholder, you now cannot file your annual accounts, you cannot file your return, you can't do anything without providing your true credentials based on biometrics. We're speaking about the digital ID as being something that's pie in the sky coming in the future. Sorry to hear. And 51 government services, 51 are now linked to this.
I used it to do my Company's House registration, but the thing is I wasn't giving my biometrics to Company's House. The cryptographic attestation to Company's House was, we have authenticated this person as being the owner of this passport. The data didn't leave my phone. So this kind of example where we hand over all of this data to all sorts of different people, no, nobody is suggesting that as the way forward.
Does the data not leave your phone? Because I was under the impression the data was deleted by the service provider within 30 days. But .gov.uk is skipping the biometric data. It doesn't show anywhere that it's being deleted. Maybe that needs
No, not .gov.uk. I think that's a good example of how things work the right way, which is you need to prove who you are for a government purpose, which is registering a Company's House. So you use the government ID in a convenient way, which is through the smartphone.
Who else has a microphone?
Oh, sorry.
I'm just trying to get in people in.
Thank you. Ian Corby from the Age Verification Providers Association. If I can answer the question on the exam at the top of the screen here, we already have through the DIATF, the Trust Framework, a perfectly effective digital ID.
100%.
Personally, I'm much more comfortable choosing amongst 50 different providers which one I trust not to track me. I think Apple did us all a great favor by going to court when the government secretly told them they wanted to break their encryption. Now I've got 50 DVS companies that might also raise a flag when MI5 come and tap them on the shoulder and say, we'd just like to know every time somebody uses their ID, just to keep everybody safe. I think it's helpful to have that private sector intermediary rather than, and in a way it's irresistible for government to start trying to track us with this stuff because their job is to keep us safe, and I understand why it'd be very hard for a Home Office minister to turn down that request.
So are you more comfortable if Apple tracks you than if the government does?
I'm just happy to have a third party somewhere there to raise a flag. Hopefully, they won't necessarily do that, but with 50 of them, so hopefully somebody will.
What proposal?
Yeah, come on.
So I wanted to come back to your point, which is really important because we do actually have digital ID. It's already here. And so I'm more familiar with the e-visa system and the right to work checks, which are digitized. And research and evidence that we have is that lots of people are having a huge amount of trouble with these systems, and they don't work, and they create huge exclusions. I actually encountered that this week with someone I wanted to employ to help me deinstall this exhibition that Wendy was talking about. So because of these problems, we're talking about that we need to be very careful here, because it's not really about taking the point of view of the privileged person for whom the digital ID system works perfectly. But what happens for those who are, for various reasons, whether because of digital exclusion, because they're homeless, because they are transgender, because they are migrants, because they're refugees, they find themselves in these difficult positions, liminal positions, where they're not recognized by the system. And I think we have to design with those people in mind, because if you design for the privileged, then you will almost certainly exclude those who don't fit in, right? But if you design for those other communities and involve them in the process, there is a chance that the system will work for them as well. So that's, I think, thank you for raising that, because we do actually have evidence of digital ID and the problems that it creates for some people in society.
We are out of time. So thank you very much, all of you, and thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists.